I have a story from my childhood that still gives me the chills to this day. It was Halloween night, and I was out with my friends trick-or-treating. We were hitting all the houses up that had their porch lights on, while avoiding the ones that did not have any lights at all. We had pillowcases with us so we could get the maximum amount of candy home without missing any. Call it the fear of missing out, but we were not going to miss anything tonight. We were all dressed up as different Ninja Turtles, and had fake, real-looking weapons and everything. So we hit up about 50 houses, and our pillowcases were getting full. We were all together, laughing and joking. The streets were filled with people dressed up and doing the same thing we were doing. We had hit up almost all the houses in a particular neighborhood, when we realized that we were at the edge of the neighborhood light. If we were to proceed any further forward, we would be in the darkness. But this is a safe area, and we weren't worried too much about something dangerous happening. But it was rather eerie how the light from the streetlight cut off so dramatically, and anywhere past it was complete darkness. That's when it happened. There was a voice in the darkness. It said, "Hey, little boy, come here." We all froze in fear and looked at each other with the most terrifying expressions on our faces. It was clear that everyone had heard the same thing, and it was not a figment of our imagination. There was a voice in the darkness calling to us, and we couldn't see anything either. It was just dark. When we did not respond, the voice yelled, "You better come here now, or I'm coming to get you." We all panicked. We dropped our candy and ran as fast as possible to the biggest adult we could find. We told him that there was someone in the darkness that was trying to get us to come to him. The big man confidently went to the location we showed him and shined his flashlight into the darkness. He told the voice to come out now. Suddenly breaking the silence, all you could hear was a fast run over leaves, but you couldn't see anything. Suddenly, a disfigured man tackled the big man at full speed, knocking him down. He started beating the big man right in front of us. At least the big guy was smart enough to tell his other big buddies where he was going. His friends rushed over to the situation that was going down and grabbed the crazy man and secured him to the ground. The police were called and took the deranged man into custody. It turns out that this man was a transient, shacking up near neighborhoods with the intent to rob the houses, selling the stolen items, and moving on to a new neighborhood. But what did he want with us? He could have just been silent and continued his ruse. Sometimes it keeps me up at night, trying to figure out what would have happened if we had gone to the darkness towards his voice. It was October, and the small town I lived in was in full swing decorating for Halloween. There were pumpkins on the porch, fake graves in the yard, and spiderwebs everywhere. It was very festive and really fun to see what new things people would come up with to up their Halloween competition game. It was a competition in a fun way, as all the people knew each other and they were very kind. It was actually the perfect area to grow up in. That is, until something happened that has haunted my memories forever. We didn't know who at the time, but somebody started stealing the pumpkins. But it wasn't just that. The first pumpkin that went missing was Miss Curtis's. Her house was decorated well, and her pumpkins were top-notch. However, her pumpkins were missing. She asked around to see if anyone knew who would have taken the pumpkins, and why. She asked the sheriff as well, just to let him know what happened. The next day, the sheriff went to Miss Curtis's house to talk to her more about the pumpkin kidnapping, but she was not there. Her car was in the driveway, and her door was unlocked, but she was nowhere to be found. The sheriff searched the whole house and found no trace of her. As the sheriff was walking away from Miss Curtis's house, he got a call from dispatch that Mr. Carpenter needed to talk to the sheriff right away. The sheriff drove straight over and saw Mr. Carpenter. He asked what the trouble was, and Mr. Carpenter told him that his pumpkins were missing as well. With a rising sense of anxiety, he asked Mr. Carpenter if he had noticed anything suspicious. There was no additional information except for the fact that the pumpkins were missing. Hoping that Miss Curtis's sudden disappearance was an isolated incident, the sheriff told Mr. Carpenter to be safe and that he would be back in the morning to check on him. He went back to the station to file a missing persons report on Mrs. Curtis and looked for any available family to ask if they knew of her whereabouts. There was no one listed as next of kin in the system. The next day, the sheriff got up, ate breakfast, and drove straight to Mr. Carpenter's house. Once again, the car was in the driveway. The door was unlocked, but there was no Mr. Carpenter. Now, extremely frustrated, the sheriff was getting concerned. He went back to the station to file a missing persons report on Mr. Carpenter and find a contact for a family member, but once again, there was no next of kin listed. While he was at the station, dispatch came over and told him that a Mr. Loomis was on the phone, and once again, there were missing pumpkins. The sheriff drove over there, got the story, and told Mr. Loomis about the disappearances that both started with the front porch pumpkins missing the day before. Mr. Loomis brushed it off as a silly idea and said no one was going to disappear him. With the writing on the wall, the sheriff told Mr. Loomis that he would be back the next day to check on him. But he lied. The sheriff picked out a great spot and hid from any eyes that could find him around Mr. Loomis's residence. The sheriff waited for a while with nothing happening. It was about 2 in the morning when the sheriff saw a white creeper van pull up to Mr. Loomis's house. 2 big men got out and entered the front door. However they entered, it was a clean way, like picking a lock or something, which made it harder to realize that it was an abduction case. The 2 men exited the house with a body bag in tow. They threw it in the back of the van and drove off. The sheriff followed them to a trailer deep in the woods. He waited until they unloaded the bag and entered the trailer. He got his Sig Sauer and shotgun ready and proceeded to the trailer, ready for a fight. He kicked the door open and told the 2 men to get on the ground now. One did, but the other started backing up with his hands behind his back. The sheriff told him to show his hands, but there was no response. The sheriff saw what the man was going for, a gun in a jacket that was hanging up in the corner of the room. The man pulled the gun, and the sheriff shot him directly in the head. The other man didn't move. He was not in a good position to do anything and realized that the sheriff was not messing around. The sheriff took the man into custody and put him in the back of his unit. He looked around the trailer now that it was safe. He found 12 pumpkins in the trailer and the body bag. It was Mr. Loomis, but he was not dead, just sedated. The sheriff went outside and saw an additional trailer he had not seen before. He went in with his gun drawn. He opened the door and yelled for anyone to come out with their hands up. There, he saw 11 people with duct tape on their mouths and hands up already, bound and tied to the wall. He saw Mr. Carpenter and Miss Curtis. The additional people he saw were younger adults that he did not even know were missing. He called for additional backup from the state and was able to save everyone. The FBI came in as well, eager to question the man that was alive and responsible for the abduction. Apparently, they were collecting people for involuntary organ harvesting, but the man refused to say who their employer was. All he would say is that our small towns were no longer safe. It was the prime target for their business, because people are so stupid and trusting there. He said that our town had figured it out, but there are more towns, and people like them, abducting people. Business goes on as usual. When I asked him why they stole the pumpkins, he simply said, "I like pumpkins, and it seemed like a funny calling card to steal the pumpkins first, then the people." The FBI sent out a special message to 86 small towns in the area. They were able to arrest 172 men for kidnapping and rescued 946 innocent people from organ harvesting, all because a lone sheriff saw something and did something to stop it. One man can make a difference. Sandra and Ben were parents of Olivia. They wanted to be the best parents ever and tried to make sure they did what was best for their daughter. It was Halloween night, and they wanted to make sure she had the best experience possible. The last neighborhood they lived in had about 18 children that did everything together. Unfortunately, they decided to move to a bigger and better house far across town. With the new gated community, there was barely anyone out trick-or-treating or houses giving out candy. They went through the whole neighborhood, and Olivia had enough candy to fill a sandwich-sized Ziploc bag. She looked devastated. Olivia got so much candy at her last neighborhood that she had to practically give it away for the next 2 months. It was a big unfortunate change, and she was so sad. Seeing his daughter in distress, though, Ben decided that they should go to another neighborhood in hopes that they would be busier. He had considered going back to their old neighborhood, but decided that they were starting a new life with a new house and should try to explore the surrounding area. They picked a random neighborhood on the GPS that looked fine, and it was about a mile away. They got in the car and started driving. Olivia's sad face soon turned into a happy one as she was going to get lots of candy now. This night had really turned around for her. They parked the car and started going around the houses. The candy was plentiful, and there was a major variety, even regular-sized candies, but the people in this particular neighborhood were weird in some way. They were all slurring their speech, they were way too touchy, and they just had that psycho vibe about them. Olivia didn't notice, but Sandra and Ben did for sure. But because Olivia was happy, they didn't want to stop her from having a good night. They finally made it around enough that Olivia was satisfied with her full bag of candy. They all looked at each other and decided that they would go home. They told Olivia not to touch the candy until they got home, though. There was a faint smell of alcohol emanating from the back seat, but it could have just been the smell of Lifesaver gummies or something. They got home and put a towel down, played a Halloween special. Olivia was watching TV as Sarah and Ben went through the candy. They found an open candy. "Aha," Sandra said. Ben just looked at her and shook his head. "We used to be so cool, and now we're getting excited about finding an open wrapper." They both laughed and continued looking. They found another, and another, and another. Sandra's face was ghostly white at what she was saying. Almost all the candy was open, and there was something else. There was a blue ooze coming out of the candy. Sandra opened one of the open candies and found more blue ooze. She broke a peanut butter cup open and found at the center was a concentration of some blue ooze stuff. Concerned, they called the police. When the police arrived, they looked at the candy and got the information of the neighborhood they went to. The police were gone for a while, but came back an hour later. The news he gave us, though, was a bit concerning. The police officer said that the neighborhood had a major issue a few years back, and all the residents had moved out. No one lived there. Sandra explained that there were people at all the houses, and all the lights were on. The officer explained that the city bought the neighborhood. They compensated all the families so they could get new houses, and they were set to demolish the entire area. They wanted to keep the lights on, though, so it did not attract squatters. So it is possible that someone could have been here and there, but on the scale that Sandra was talking about, it would have taken a busload of people and be a coordinated evolution. Sandra asked what was in the candy. The officer said that he wasn't sure, but someone put that in all the candy, probably with a needle with a blue liquid of some kind. He said, "Don't touch any of it, though." The officer left, and Sandra and Ben were devastated. What kind of world do we live in? So they all got in the car and drove to Walmart and got Olivia some candy. In the end, everyone was happy. Be careful going to random neighborhoods you don't know. A group of college kids just couldn't grow up, especially on Halloween night. They would revert back to their young selves and play silly games. They all got some drinks and went to the local cemetery. They were going to play Ghost in the Graveyard. The rules are simple. Have everyone except for the ghost stand at the home base while the ghost runs off and hides somewhere in the graveyard. Now, the home base players try to find the ghost. Meanwhile, the ghost attempts to jump out and tag players. If someone sees the ghost, they yell, "Ghost in the graveyard," and run back to home base. This game was going to be an exciting callback to their fun from their past, and would be a great relief to them now that they were expected to do so much adulting. There was something interesting about the graveyard on this particular night. It felt darker than usual. The moon was bigger tonight, but for some reason, it wasn't brighter. There was a dense fog around the graveyard that was cold when you passed through it. It was a perfect example of what a haunted graveyard should look like. It was perfect for tonight. They picked Robert to be the first ghost. He was fast and would get the game started right. They all went to home base, the grave of a man named Chester Brown. The group was stepping all over his grave, not paying attention to the morality of stepping on a human's grave, but were more concerned with the game above all else. Robert disappeared into the fog, mocking them that he would find them and scare them all. A few minutes went by, giving Robert the time he needed to hide somewhere. When enough time had passed by, everyone was unleashed into the graveyard. There was a lot of space and great places to hide, so Robert could be anywhere. Sam was all alone and wandering the graveyard, looking everywhere for Robert. He heard something and was convinced he had found Robert. He slowly crept over to the noise and prepared to jump past the tombstone to surprise Robert. He jumped forward and yelled, "Ghost in the graveyard." It was Robert, but there was something wrong. Robert was a deformed and terrifying version of himself. His skin was melted, his eyes were blood red and sticking out of his face, and his clothes were ripped. Sam's smile dropped, and he took off to home base. He ran as fast as possible, completely terrified. He heard something chasing him, and it was right behind him. He got to home base, turned around, and Robert was not there. What the hell was that? Did Robert put on makeup, or was it something else? How did he look so convincingly like a terrifying monster? Suddenly, Sam heard multiple footsteps from different directions. From all directions, he saw Kanisha running towards him, then Becky, then Mandeep, and Mike. Everyone was back at home plate, and all had the same terrifying story about Robert's appearance. With either a shared delusion or something really wrong, they were done with this game and just wanted to go home. Suddenly, Robert came out of the fog. He looked completely normal. Robert said, "I got all of you." He looked at the concern from everybody's face and asked, "What's wrong?" They all told him that they saw him out there, and he looked like a monster. He laughed it off and said, "Look at me. It's just me. Your mind is playing tricks on you." After that, even though Robert tried to reassure the crowd, no one wanted to play anymore. They all walked back to their cars and called it a night. No one could explain how they had a shared mass hysteria. They did. As they were walking towards their cars, Sam looked back at the graveyard. In the distance, he could see a figure watching the group leave, then turning around to head deeper into the graveyard. Everyone loves getting scared at haunted houses, and a group of guys plus one girl, Matt, Will, Keith, and Bethany, were no exception. They were looking for the scariest haunted house they could find and planned on going for Halloween. They have been to all kinds of haunted houses in the country, big and small, looking for the perfect one. But they were never satisfied because they thought all these haunted houses weren't very scary. They knew it was fake, and the rush they got when they were kids would just never be fulfilled. As they exited their sixth haunted house of October, a stranger approached them. He asked, "How was it?" They looked at him with disappointed faces and said, It's fine, but it's the same old thing. He looked excited to hear that because he was about to pitch them an exciting new opportunity. How would you like to go to a real scary haunted house for Halloween? They all looked intrigued. The haunted house he referred to was not open to the public and was only by special invitation. The man said, "I know you've been looking for something more exciting than this. Are you interested?" They all said yes and exchanged information. They left each other and would soon see each other with the promise of a real haunted house. Halloween was coming up, and they all received their official invitation. There was a cryptic message that accompanied the ticket, but they all assumed it was part of the game. They got in the car and put the provided coordinates into the GPS. It pointed to an old, condemned neighborhood. They were all excited to go on this new adventure. They arrived, and there were guards at the front entrance. After talking to the guards, they were confirmed to be guests and proceeded to park the car and head inside. There were a few other groups of people entering the main building at the same time. With everyone gathered, there was a major announcement from a man named Victor Bran. "Hello, everyone," Victor said. "Welcome to the scariest haunted house you will ever find." As he was talking, there were footsteps and knocking sounds in the background. Everyone was looking around at the various noises, but Victor seemed to be oblivious to all the noises in the background. "You are all here because you have been seeking out a haunted house. Well, this house is haunted, or something is really wrong with it. Here's the proposal. If you can last an hour in this house without exiting, you will win $100,000 each." Excited, everyone looked at each other and were happy with the additional benefit, but really they were just there for the scares. They all agreed, and Victor and his friends quickly exited. Their last words, "Good luck." The group of 15 people looked at each other and laughed at the situation. What a joke. As they were laughing, something fell in the other room. They all heard it and moved towards the noise. In the kitchen, there was a book that fell on the floor. Suddenly, all the cabinets opened, and knives and plates flew out of the drawers. Multiple knives hit different people. This was starting to get real. Shocked to see that this wasn't a joke, 3 contestants sprinted for the door, namely the ones with knives protruding from their skin. The chairs at the table flew in all directions, hitting another person. The chandelier fell to the ground as well, and shattered into pieces. Matt looked at Bethany. "Do you want to get out of here?" Bethany said, "No. Let's just make sure we're not going to get hurt by something." The group got out of the kitchen and were now in the living room. Objects in the living room were flying at them as well. Pictures flying off the walls, lamps smashing into walls. When the couches came after them, they all quickly ran upstairs. They found a bedroom with not much in it. They grabbed all the loose items they could find and threw it out in the hallway. They closed the door and huddled up in a circle. As a group, they had determined that this is where they were going to stay for the next 50 minutes. Unfortunately, their plan was ruined by this crazy house. 20 minutes had passed by, and they heard items slamming into walls and ceilings, glass breaking, and people screaming. They were terrified to leave this room at this point, but felt somewhat comfortable. They were all looking at each other and just wanted this to be over. Out of nowhere, Will started shaking violently and foaming at the mouth. They all jumped up, and Will fell over. He was dead. Bethany cried as she ran to the door. However, she stopped in her tracks. They all saw a puddle on the ground that came under the door. When they opened the door, water started slowly coming in, which was from an overflowing sink. The water must have got to Will, and the water must be electrified. With this new threat, Matt broke the window and they all went to the roof. They walked across the roof a little bit. While looking for safe passage, Matt found another window and broke it, They were looking for an alternate way down the stairs to avoid the electrified puddle. They entered the next room and went to the door to open it. The curtains they passed by caught fire quickly, and suddenly the room was ablaze. They all exited the room and were now in the hallway. Enough was enough, they thought. Keith, let's get the hell out of here. They went down the hallway as fast as possible, avoiding furniture and books slamming into the wall everywhere. Another room was on fire now. The bathroom sinks exploded, and water was shooting all over the place. The windows all exploded as they were running towards the door, glass flying everywhere. There was a roaring sound, like the sound of a freight train, or a tornado. This was pure madness. They all finally got to the front door and ran through it. They made it about 10 steps out the door, and all the chaotic noises suddenly stopped. In front of them was Victor, with 2 of his guys. Victor said, "You all didn't make it. You had 20 minutes left. No money for you, alright?" But he just didn't understand. We didn't care about the money anymore. Bethany screamed at Victor, "You heartless bastard. We just lost our friend Will in that house." Victor said, "Who is Will? When you came, it was just you 3. They were all confused. Was Victor crazy or lying? Bethany said, "Will came with us, and you shook his hand. Don't tell me you don't remember him." Victor said, "Honestly, I don't know what you're talking about. You have to understand that this house is actually haunted, and you acknowledged when you signed a waiver of liability. The house makes you see things that aren't there." When he said that, they all looked back at the house. There was no fire, flood, or broken glass. The house was in perfect condition. Bethany looked back and asked Victor, "Where are all the other people that played the game?" Victor, looking irritated, said, "There are no other people. We brought you 3 here to do the challenge, and that's it. Now if you're ready, you can get out of here." They all got in the car and started driving away from the house, happy that they still had their lives. As they were leaving the area, Bethany looked back. She saw Will, with hundreds of people behind him, staring at them driving away, with their white, ghostly glow contrasting with the dark very well. Haunted houses can be fun, but don't look for something too scary. It might be the scariest thing you ever did. A group of friends gathered around a table on Halloween night. The objective was to test if this magic cup was really real. Someone had found videos on TikTok of a group of teenagers that found a cup with mysterious powers. When they drank from the cup, according to the onlookers in the crowd, they would convulse, their eyes would turn black, and they would say and do really crazy things. Nothing too crazy, just things like cry and tell funny stories about themselves, say crazy stuff, things like that. It was like a paranormal way to pull something out of you, and it was just so entertaining. So Brian tracked down the group that had the cup and got it. He saved it especially for this night, Halloween night. Everyone gathered around as Brian slowly pulled the cup from the box. It was a plain cup with ancient carvings on it, with some more recent Sharpie writings on top of the ancient carvings. The modern writing said, "Do not drink from this, the devil's chalice," and "cursed." The teenagers read all of this and laughed. "So dramatic," one of them said. Brian asked the crowd, "Who wants to go first?" Kaylee said, "I'll go." Everyone looked at her with shock and laughter. She was the smallest person in the room, at 5'2" and 100 pounds, but she was the first to volunteer for this unexpected challenge. Kaylee asked what she had to do. Brian laid out the rules. He explained, "First, you have to put alcohol in the cup. It doesn't matter what kind. Second, you need to prick your finger and add a drop of your own blood. She looked questionably at Brian, like, what did she just sign up for? He reassured her and said, just a small amount will do. Then he told her the most important thing. Third, you must say these words correctly, or something can happen that is not good. The words were Klaatu, Vrata, Niktu. He told her to practice, but she was insulted by the request. She could say 3 words, and correctly. He needed to lighten up and stop micromanaging her. This was supposed to be fun. As Kaylee started the ritual, everyone pulled out their phones to record the whole thing. She put vodka in a cup and swished it around, giving the cup a little sniff, as if to ensure the vodka was really in the cup. Vodka has a terrible alcohol smell, but there's something about it that is alluring. Next, Brian gave her a pin to prick her finger. She did, and placed a drop of her blood in the vodka-filled cup. Next was the words. She looked at Brian and said, Klaatu, Vrata, Biktu. Extremely concerned, Brian ran straight to her and tried to stop her from taking the drink. She messed up the words, and that is not good. He was too late, though. Kaylee quickly slammed the drink and wiped her mouth. She looked up, though, and saw fire and flames everywhere. It was a terrifying display of a hellscape. She was no longer in the house, but in hell. There were creatures down here, too. Then she saw something that really concerned her. She saw a demonic presence approach her, howling in her face. She panicked and picked up a sharp stick and stabbed the demon through the head. It fell to the ground. Then, multiple demons approached her from the left, howling with an unbearable sound. She used her stick to dispatch all the demons that were coming to attack her. With all the demons dead, she wandered around the hellscape to find a way out. Why did she agree to this? This was crazy. Suddenly, 2 more demons approached her, but they were keeping their distance. These demons were different from the rest for some reason in the way they were behaving. They were howling, but they were holding guns and were pointing them right at her. Feeling like her life was in danger, she charged at them with her stick, but she didn't make it. She was gunned down by those demons and was dead. What really happened was different than what was perceived. Kaylee was shot by police responding to a domestic disturbance. Back at the house where the ritual was performed, everyone except one person was dead. They all had suffered from knife wounds. After drinking from the cup, Kaylee had lost her mind and went on a murderous rampage. First, she killed Brian when he tried to stop her. Then everyone else got off the couch and tried to stop her. She took them all out. They thought that Kaylee was small and they could all stop her together, but they were wrong. In the chaos, one girl was able to sneak away and call the police. She survived, but the damage was already done. The cup had the ability to make people do funny and outlandish things, but the ritual had to be done right. If not, there were major consequences. They knew of the dangers and did it anyways. Ancient artifacts are nothing to mess with. Through its long life, an object could have something attached to it that you don't want to let out. Halloween originally comes from a few different places. One of the original festivities that started Halloween was the Celtic festival of Samhain. The ancient Celts, who inhabited what is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and parts of France, celebrated a festival called Samhain around November 1st. Samhain marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, a time when it was believed that the boundary between the living and the dead was blurred. People lit bonfires and wore costumes to ward off evil spirits. Another origin story is the Roman influence. The Romans conquered Celtic territories, and some of their traditions merged with those of the Celts. The Roman festival Feralia, which honored the dead, was celebrated in late October. Additionally, a festival called Pomona, dedicated to the Roman goddess of fruit and trees, was celebrated around the same time and contributed to the tradition of bobbing for apples. Another influence is the Christian influence. In the 7th century, the Catholic Church established All Saints' Day on November 1st to honor the saints and martyrs. The night before, October 31st, came to be known as All Hallows' Eve, later shortened to Halloween. The Church attempted to Christianize the pagan traditions of Samhain by emphasizing prayers of the dead and the idea that Halloween was a time to remember and pray for deceased loved ones. There was a medieval and modern evolution of Halloween as well. Over time, Halloween continued to evolve. In medieval Europe, various superstitions and practices associated with the supernatural became intertwined with the holiday. For example, people believed that on Halloween, spirits and supernatural beings roam the earth, leading to the tradition of wearing costumes to confuse or appease these entities. Halloween was brought to North America by Irish and Scottish immigrants in the 19th century. In the United States, it further evolved and became the holiday we recognize today. Trick-or-treating, carving pumpkins, and other modern traditions developed during this time. So the original story of Halloween is a complex story of ancient Celtic, Roman, and Christian traditions that have been blended and transformed over centuries. Today, Halloween is a holiday celebrated with costumes, decorations, candy, and various spooky and festive activities. It remains a time to honor the dead, embrace the supernatural, and have fun with family and friends. Everybody's heard the story about the Headless Horseman, but here's a little bit of history about how the story began. The story of the Headless Horseman is closely associated with the Washington Irving short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was first published in 1820 as part of a collection. In The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman is a spectral and malevolent figure who haunts the Dutch settlement of Sleepy Hollow in New York's Hudson Valley during the late 18th century. The story centers around the character of Ichabod Crane, a superstitious and awkward school teacher from Connecticut, who comes to Sleepy Hollow to teach the children. Ichabod Crane becomes infatuated with Katrina Van Tassel, the beautiful daughter of a wealthy farmer named Baltras Van Tassel. He hopes to marry Katrina off and inherit her new family's wealth. However, his rival for Katrina's affection is a handsome and wealthy young man named Brom Bones. One fateful night, Ichabod Crane attends a harvest party at the Van Tassel's farm. After the party, he sets out on horseback to return home. As he rides through the dark and eerie woods near Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, he encounters bumps, creaks, frogs, and all kinds of other noises. He encounters the Headless Horseman as well, a ghostly figure said to be the spirit of a Hessian soldier who had lost his head to a cannonball during the American Revolutionary War. The Headless Horseman is said to ride in search of his lost head and terrorizes anyone he encounters. Ichabod desperately tries to outrun the Headless Horseman, but the ghostly rider gives chase. Just as the Headless Horseman is about to catch Ichabod, he throws his own pumpkin-shaped head at him. The next morning, all that is found of Ichabod Crane is his hat and a smashed pumpkin. The story leaves it ambiguous whether Ichabod Crane was actually taken by the Headless Horseman, or if it was a prank by Brom Bones to scare him away from Sleepy Hollow. The townspeople have their own theories about what happened, but the truth remains a mystery. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow has become a classic American ghost story, and is often associated with Halloween. The character of the Headless Horseman continues to be a popular figure in Halloween folklore, and is frequently depicted in various adaptations and retellings of the story. The Salem witch trials were a series of events that occurred in 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, that led to the arrests and trials of numerous individuals accused of practicing witchcraft. The story of the Salem witches is a dark and tragic chapter in American history. Here's an overview of the events. The witch trials began when a group of young girls, including Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, started exhibiting bizarre behavior, such as fits, convulsions, and strange utterances. The local doctor could find no physical cause for their symptoms and suggested that they might be afflicted by witchcraft. The accusations spread. The girls accused 3 women of being witches. Tituba, an enslaved woman who had been telling the girls stories of magic and witchcraft, Sarah Good, a homeless woman, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman. These accusations triggered a series of arrests. This created mass hysteria. As the accusations spread, many more people in Salem and the surrounding towns were accused of being witches. The trials became a frenzy of accusations, trials, and public hangings. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and many innocent people were caught up in hysteria. The accused witches were brought to trial in the court of Oyer and Terminer. The trials were conducted in a manner that did not allow for a fair defense, and the judges relied on spectral evidence, which was testimony about dreams and visions, and hearsay. 19 people, consisting of 14 women and 5 men, were hanged as witches, and 1 man was pressed to death with heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. The witch trials eventually began to lose support as people realized the lack of evidence and the injustice of the proceedings. Governor William Phipps dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer in October 1692, effectively ending the witch trials. In the years that followed, the Salem witch trials were widely condemned. In 1711, the colony of Massachusetts passed a resolution acknowledging the errors and injustices of the trials, and in 1957, the state formally apologized for the events of 1692. The Salem witch trials were often seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mass hysteria, religious fanaticism, and abuse of power. They have been the subject of numerous books, plays, films, and continue to be a significant historical and cultural reference point in the discussion of witchcraft and the limits of justice. Halloween is a time when spooky stories and urban legends often come to the forefront. Here are some popular Halloween urban legends that have circulated over the years. The poison candy. This is perhaps the most well-known Halloween urban legend. It suggests that malicious individuals may put razor blades, pins, or poison in Halloween candy and give it out to unsuspecting children. While there have been a few isolated incidents, they are extremely rare, and most reports of tampered candy turned out to be hoaxes. The babysitter and the caller. In this urban legend, the babysitter receives threatening phone calls while watching children. She eventually realizes that the calls are coming from inside the house, and a sinister intruder is with her. The story is the basis for the classic horror movie When a Stranger Calls. The Hook-Handed Man. This legend tells the tale of a couple making out in a car when they hear the news report of an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand. When they return home, they find a bloody hook hanging from their car door. This story is a cautionary tale of the dangers of premarital sex. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. A driver picks up a hitchhiker on a dark and stormy night. After giving the hitchhiker a ride, the driver turns to speak to them, only to discover that the hitchhiker has mysteriously vanished from the car. The driver then learns that the hitchhiker was a ghost who died years ago on that road. The Haunted House. This legend often involves a haunted house that was the site of a gruesome murder or other tragic event. People who enter the house on Halloween night are said to encounter vengeful spirits or terrifying paranormal activity. Candyman. Similar to the Bloody Mary legend, the Candyman is a supernatural entity summoned by saying his name multiple times in front of a mirror. It is said that if you repeat Candyman 3 times while looking in the mirror, he will appear. The Killer in the Backseat. A woman driving alone at night becomes convinced that someone is following her or is in the back seat of her car. In a panic, she rushes home and calls the police, only to discover that the murderer was indeed in her car and the police have caught him. Bloody Mary. This legend involves a ritual where you stand in front of a mirror, say Bloody Mary 3 times, and the ghostly figure of Bloody Mary is supposed to appear in the mirror. The legend has different variations, but it taps into our fear of the supernatural and the unknown. The razor blade apple. Similar to the poison candy legend, the story suggests that people might hide razor blades or other dangerous items in apples to give trick-or-treaters. There have been a few reported cases of this happening, but they are very rare. The black cat. Black cats have been associated with superstition and Halloween, and there are urban legends about them bringing bad luck or being witches' familiars. The legend of the jack-o'-lantern. This legend originates from an Irish folk tale about a man named Stingy Jack, who was too deceitful to enter heaven and too mischievous for hell. He was doomed to wander the earth with a carved-out, turn-up lantern to light his way. The legend gave rise to the tradition of carving pumpkins into jack-o'-lanterns. The Halloween Party Massacre. This legend tells the story of a Halloween party where the person is dressed as a killer goes on a rampage, and the partygoers assume it's just part of the act until it's too late. It plays on the fear that something sinister might be hiding behind a costume.